Hear that there's a housing crisis. What does a housing crisis look like to you?
Well, it's funny because, I mean, a lot of the talk about housing crisis is the number of units available. And I'll say, yes, we do need to build more units. We do need to have more density in a lot of areas. We need to have more options for people. But I'm going to say what we also have more is a ownership and wealth distribution problem. And so what we have is, even though it is stated that, 60% of Canadians own their homes, well, those numbers really switch when you start looking at urban centers, and those numbers switch even harder when you look at different age demographics. Millennials are in a much different situation when it comes to home ownership, especially in the cities, than, say, Canadians overall. So we look at these stats that say, no, well, 2/3 of all Canadians own homes. But when you start unraveling it for the younger generations, you start unraveling it for the cities, you realize that's not the case. It's actually flipped. And so what we need to do is ensure that there are options for people to own homes and have available rental units as well. And right now, there aren't really many options. And because wages have not kept up with the cost of living, it's not balancing out for everyone.
So how do you think we can address this issue?
There's a couple ways. So with wages, we've kind of got ourselves into a bit of problem. And the problem comes from a corporate policy that was really adapted in the 1980s, where corporations are mandated to show profits for all their shareholders above all else. So when a business plateaus, they have three places that they can take it from. They can take it from profits, they can take it from wages, or they can take it from quality of product. And wages have been suppressed more than anything else across the board. And so what we have is this thing where wages really haven't gone up, not only with the cost of inflation, but especially not with the cost of living, especially since much of our needs have been commodified to an extent that they've been seen as investments. People's entire net worth are in their homes now, but these are needs people have to live. So it's like if you were trying to go to a concert and a scalper bought up all the tickets, but you have no choice but to go to the show because it's something you need to do. And you're in this situation where you're constantly going to be paying more and more and more than you can technically afford. So you're supposed to only spend 25% of your income on housing, but people, especially in the Lower Mainland, are spending 40, 50, even more in some cases.
I want to touch upon that affordability.
Sure.
So I see that all the parties have promised to build housing.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out if this housing is going to be affordable. And what does affordability mean?
Well, and this is the thing. So the Liberal plan with the 1.4 million new homes, well, when you break down their actual plan, it's a lot about retrofitting, repair, and you only get about 150,000 new units into the market at all. And so when you break down the Conservative plan, and it's saying, all right, we're going to build a million homes. So one, in 3 years, that's a little ambitious, I'm not going to lie. But two, none of it is attached to income. All of it is just, we're going to build housing. And that's going to help a lot of people who are realtors, but it's not going to help affordability for the people who need to actually get into those homes. Now, with the NDP plan, they want to build 500,000 units, and they want to attach it to affordability. And affordability is a shifting term, unfortunately. And to me, and what a lot of economists, even from the 1930s, have said up to now, is, like I said, you should not be spending more than 25% of your income on housing. And that's supposed to include utilities. It's supposed to include strata fees. And that's without debt. But now we have student debt people are straddled with, consumer debt, things that didn't even exist when these numbers were first generated. And yet we keep trying to push the scale saying, well, you can spend 30%. Well, you can spend 40%. But that's not what you are supposed to spend in order to save for retirement, in order to save for your children's education, in order to thrive in life. And so we need to simultaneously lift wages, which support labor movements, support different types of systems that encourage high wages in Canada, as well as we need to lower those costs by basically supplementing large swaths of housing to be reflective of income. Otherwise, people are never going to be able to afford.
Okay, so you talked about commodification of basic needs. Can you explain that to me a little bit more? So everyone needs a house, right? Everyone needs a house, but you have companies, developers, like one in Toronto, Core Developments. They bought up $1 billion of single-family homes for rental units. Well, that $1 billion worth of homes are homes that your average person can't go purchase now. They are now a rental unit for income for that company, right? And people like to blame foreign buyers as the big problem, but the thing is that's a red herring.
Foreign buyers are a very small percentage. Maybe they're higher in some areas, but they're a small percentage compared to, domestic corporate interests, right? So how we distribute, residential housing needs to change. You and I, even if you rent or you own, we are living in a place. Majority of people, unless you are homeless, are living in a place. So it's not the number of units that we're lacking, and I say we do need more units. It's how those units are allocated, how they are treated as a need for people to have. Because right now, they are treated as a way for other people to make money.
About the wealth transfer, I keep hearing about that all the time. Can you please explain to me what's that about?
Well, I'm going to start with just the amount of wealth that the 1% have. So in 2016, there was a study done that the 1% had about 24% of the wealth in Canada. And then it was followed up in 2019, 2020, that number is around 26 to 27%. And now it's estimated after COVID that number is even higher. There's no real data to back it up fully yet, but it's estimated to be much higher than that. What had happened is middle class over COVID in particular lost assets. Whereas, a lot of billionaires that were in positions of power owning companies where we put $750 billion of liquidity into the market, their net worths increased, both in Canada and the US and across the world. And so what happened is we had people who had no ability to work because of COVID. They lost a lot of their assets and they were given, the bare minimum to survive. And then we had the rich who were still profiting, people who owned, grocery stores, delivery stores, people who owned, Netflix, things like that, services that were still being used in that time. Their value continued to skyrocket. And people in the middle, they lost everything or something.
It sounds very unfair.
Yes, it is.
How do you plan to fix this?
Well, the NDP have already talked about doing a wealth tax. That's in 2019 they talked about a 1% wealth tax on assets over 20 million, and they went, we've done the math. We think it's better to do 1% over assets over 10 million, and that's going to generate a fair amount of revenue right there. It's a start. I think really we need to really pick and choose which companies we're subsidizing a lot better. It's about choices. There's a lot of money in the system, but the choices we're making are to subsidize usually companies that don't need it. Many companies received the CEWS and then posted profits and gave out not only like shareholder dividends, but CEO bonuses over this time. So our taxpayer money went to these companies and they still just ended up pocketing it for the select few.
And about the CEO bonuses, I noticed that the NDP has been talking about the divergence between the worker salaries and the CEO salaries.
Yes, and so there has been since the 1980s, there's been a big change in what's going on in salaries. So the CEO compensation has increased. I think it's almost 1,000% since then, and workers compensation has basically gone up with inflation, if that, not even in most cases. And so how do we make it more fair? Do we tie, you're not allowed to give yourself this bonus unless you're paying these kinds of wages to your employees? Do we tie it? You're not allowed to make more than this if they're not making more than that. It's basically setting roadblocks or like speed limits on how much these people at the top can make, because right now it's gone unchecked. And it's gone to a point where now it's so unfair that, we've got billionaires in the United States flying to space. That's not what should happen. We should start solving society's issues before we have private space travel.
Solving society's issues. We just experienced 2 months ago a once in a 1,000-year heat wave.
Yeah.
And the fire season has been the third worst on record, I believe. So, the effects of climate change are undeniable.
Yeah.
And do you see a way we can address this?
I think there's two major things that we need to do. So, first off, the IPCC report that came out needs to be taken very seriously, that we are going to get to a 1.5 to 2 degree Celsius increase in global temperature by 2050. And so all of our current targets of net zero 2050 aren't good enough. We need to be a lot more bold, and we need to drastically invest into renewable energies and diverge money that's going into high pollutants. And the majority of the part, that's high industry. That's not individual consumers. Individual consumers are often the ones blamed, but industry are the ones that primarily are the ones that are causing the pollutants. And then I like to think of, how do we solve it in the immediacy for people, for you and me? And for me, that's mitigation and adaptation. So we need to mitigate the effects of what's going on around us, and we need to adapt to what's currently happening. And so, like, let's say we were in an energy crisis in the 1970s. It would be about getting as much energy per unit as possible, right? So with the current existing technology. So we can get 50 people into an electric bus a lot easier than we can get 50 people into individual electric vehicles, right? So creating those kinds of things, those systems in place so that people can use them, they're efficient, they're utilized, and they are more efficient. I think that kind of investment and that kind of work is really desperately needed to make a bigger impact as quick as possible. And then we need to adapt to the heat. We need to have crown corporations that go up, that start mass building, electrical, non-gas powered equipment that was subsidized, that can be used by individuals, can be used by industry, so that we are putting our money into it, and we are putting potentially even profits into it in the future.
As an Indigenous person, what does reconciliation mean to you?
So reconciliation, it's about really treating Indigenous groups as nation states, which they have not been. They really haven't been. Now, there are examples locally where we've been doing land back, and it's been really beneficial. So the Squamish Nation was given some land back for around the old Molson Brewery, and now it's being developed into rental units. You have self-determination of income. You've got something that benefits society, and I think that is a great micro example of something that can be done on a larger scale. So we have, First Nations all over Canada in different areas where we can create industry partnerships, and they can be green industry partnerships. And that way we can ensure that there is a financial aspect that benefits these individual nation states and the government as a whole to create, both financial and, personal reconciliation. I think it's that ability to have your own something to be proud of.
So today I got to meet your kids.
Oh yeah.
And you're, I have a son who's the same age as yours, and you're also a candidate in my riding. So this election, my vote is going to be about who will give the best chance for my son, who's going to act in my son's best interests.
Absolutely.
And so you have a chance to, why would I vote for Sean?
Well, my policy, actually, you mentioned Indigenousness, my policy comes from that, in that you're not working for yourself, you're working for the next 7 generations. And so everything that you do should be about the future and shouldn't be just about this current election cycle. And I find in politics, that's where we get into a trap. We find Band-Aid solutions to the immediacy of our problems. Oh, well, we hear this is a problem, we're gonna do this right now. But we don't look at the long term enough. And I think as an individual myself, that's the hard work I enjoy doing. I like looking, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years down the road and saying, if we do this now, how will that benefit all future generations? And personally, that's the kind of work I'm more interested in. And as much as I want to be part of, projects that will help us in the immediacy, like Pharmacare or affordable housing, it's the structures of how those housing units are distributed, how we look at profit, how we look at wages. That kind of work, which is much more difficult, is what interests me. And I think that is what will help future generations more than just quick and easy solutions.
So what's your take on Pharmacare and truly universal health?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I know it's strange. Today is the 10-year anniversary of my father's death. He actually died of cancer, pancreatic. He was a bit of a drinker, but he never saw a dentist. His teeth actually rotted right out of his mouth, and that's actually a big part of the benefits that I'm like, wow, if my parents had benefits, would they still be alive? Both my parents died. My mother died 13 years ago, my father 10 now.
Sorry.
And so it's something where that's, when I'm looking to future generations, I'm also looking to the examples in my personal life where I go, wow, if they had this, would their lives have been different? And so, yeah, I'm about top to bottom healthcare. I'm about making sure that we have those so everyone can thrive, and not providing those, how do we call ourselves a civilized society if we have the ability, the technology, and the means to do it, but we simply aren't making the choice?
what are you going to advocate for Vancouver South?
Vancouver South. For Vancouver South, when I'm out the door, the biggest thing people talk to me about is affordability. You know, we are actually a very heavy renter riding, believe it or not. And it's something where people are concerned about how they can get services here, how they can get, have affordability here, all that kind of stuff. And for me, it is about maintaining and protecting our co-ops here. Co-ops are federally mandated, even though they're municipally ran. And I think encouraging those on a federal level to not only protect the existing ones, but to build and expand new ones. There is some affordable housing going up on Marine Drive, but it's not in the affordable range for people earning the median income. You still need an income range of $80,000 to $130,000 to afford it. And as much as that's great, I don't think it's good enough. I think we can do better. And so that affordability comes back to, your health care. When I'm knocking on doors in the co-ops and I'm talking to people, there's people on disability who are just making it by. People on old age, security, where they also are finding it's coming up woefully short. And so I am a proponent of guaranteed livable basic income. And I think that's something long-term that I think I want to develop. But I will say that is only a tool in the toolbox. It is not the begin all and end all. I think that is a great thing to get to ensure there's more equity, but I think there's so much more to go, and that's going to be changing how housing is viewed, changing how needs are distributed as a whole. And I think Vancouver South would be, very proud to know that they're part of that greater change.
So it's going to come to the stage where my wife or I would have to consider leaving our careers because of childcare, and this is a serious problem in Vancouver South.
Especially in Vancouver South, it's like a childcare desert, actually. Yeah.
What are you going to do about that?
So childcare for me, I come from a non-traditional work industry. Childcare models are based entirely off of 9-to-5 jobs, and so I work in an industry where I work 12-hour days plus sometimes, right? And so creating the infrastructure and encouraging, training for people in those industries so that we have childcare options outside of 9 to 5. We have extended care, we have, 24-hour care, and now people are worried that's bad for the children. And so my solution with that is to really encourage workplace integrated childcare. And, sometimes for us, that's the home. Sometimes that's your workplace. If you have Amazon coming into downtown Vancouver, why aren't they required to have a childcare plan for their employees? Every time you build a house in Vancouver, you need to have 3 trees and a shrub. So when a large business comes in, why don't they have to have a childcare plan for their workers? And that is something that it's just so common sense. I'm surprised that it has not gone through. And so I'm trying to build those structures because we have a once-in-a-generation investment from both the federal and provincial governments. So we need to jump on it now and look at new models so that people are actually serviced properly.
So I keep hearing people say that, the Liberals and the Conservatives, they have done the same thing over and over again, but still they're reluctant to vote NDP. Is that fear of vote splitting, or is that just inertia?
It's both. And people are afraid of vote splitting because people who traditionally vote Liberal when they are afraid to vote otherwise is because they want to keep the Conservatives at bay. They remember the dark Harper times or things like that, and that's what keeps them at bay. But the thing is, I look at voting records. You can go to ourcommons.ca and you can look up voting records of every single MP, of every single party, and I'm sorry, but the Conservatives and Liberals vote the same on the majority of issues. There's some social issues where they differ, but you talking about needs for people, there was Pharmacare bills already rejected. There were, there was a bill about, making Loblaws pay back its supplement for electrical fridges that they got because they fixed the price of bread. But that was voted down by both the Liberals and Conservatives. So when you're saying you're getting the same thing over and over again, it's literally, you are, because they're voting the same. And so I think people really need to be educated on what the voting records are, because what people do in the House of Commons versus how they campaign are very different. And I will say my record with the NDP, the reason I'm running under them is because the way they campaign and the way they vote in the House of Commons doesn't differ. So that's where I want people to be bold and make that decision.
And so you touched upon an interesting point there about the voting records. Another thing that I've noticed that Liberals and Conservatives vote together is on free trade.
Yes.
and I see that NDP has generally voted differently. What's your take on that?
Well, it's very difficult because, we want to be great trading partners to our allies, but at what cost for domestic jobs? So, if you're going to build a car in Mississauga, or you're going to build a car in Mexico, the equipment you're using is the same. It's the difference is the wages. So we're able to cheaply export labor, which takes it away from Canadian jobs. And so we need to make sure that what we do encourages Canadian job growth. So I work in the film industry, it's subsidized. We have tax credits in the film industry. But the thing is, our tax credits are attached to hiring locals. And those are all high-paying jobs. Those are all six-figure incomes for everyone. So if we're going to have subsidies at all in industry, they have to be attached to high-paying jobs. If we're subsidizing, writing blank checks to oil companies or writing blank checks to anyone for that matter, they need to be attached to jobs. And that's why I'm really investing in more crown corporations, because then we get to make that choice ourselves.
The topic of low wages, I noticed that Liberals and Conservatives both are very big on the temporary foreign worker program. What's your take on that?
Well, it's the same reason that they're big on the free trade. It's, we are exporting the work for cheaper labor. And in this case, we're importing cheaper labor because the jobs are not paying enough for a Canadian to live off of. So it's not that we have a labor shortage in any of these situations. It's that we have a wage shortage. We have insufficient wages for Canadians to do the work. I can assure you, it doesn't matter what the job is. If it pays enough, people will do it. And so we need to make sure that we aren't, supplementing, low wages, because that doesn't help, people overall.
Sean, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and talk to me. I really appreciate it. And so I've been reaching out to a lot of candidates, and I'm really happy that you're in my riding and you came to talk to me. I really appreciate it because I get to meet you firsthand and understand what you offer here, right? And that's very important.
Well, I really appreciate it. Please, and tell everyone just share this video, share any of my other videos. Just try and get people to speak to me, and anyone can talk to me. If you send me an email at seanmcquillan.ndp.ca, I will answer it. If given the chance, I will talk to every last person in the riding. So that's the only thing I can say.
Okay, thanks again, Sean.